The dust kicked up by the wagon wheels hung in the late afternoon air like a veil between worlds. Eliza Moreland sat rigid on the hard bench, her gloved hands folded in her lap, knuckles white beneath the worn leather. She had been traveling for 3 days, sleeping in the wagon bed when darkness fell, eating hardtack and dried beans when hunger gnawed too deep to ignore. Dry willow appeared on the horizon like a promise nobody intended to keep a cluster of weathered buildings huddled against the endless prairie, their unpainted boards gray as old bones. The town's single street stretched before her, rutted deep by countless wagons that had passed through on their way to somewhere better. She paid the driver his fee without meeting his eyes. He'd tried conversation the first day, given up by the second, and now merely nodded as he handed down her single carpet bag. It held everything she owned, 2 dresses, undergarments mended so many times the original fabric was more memory than reality, a Bible she no longer read, and $17 sewn into the lining her entire fortune. "Ma'am," the driver said, clearing his throat, "you sure about this Dry Willow ain't much of a place for a lady alone?" "I'm sure," Eliza said, though certainty was a luxury she could no longer afford. She took her bag and stepped down, her boots raising small clouds of dust that settled on her dark traveling dress. The driver hesitated, then clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward, leaving her standing in the middle of the street like a scarecrow someone had forgotten to stake. She assessed her options with the cold calculation of someone who had learned that hope was often more dangerous than despair. The dusty boot saloon dominated one side of the street, its bat-wing doors swinging lazily in the breeze. Piano music drifted out, along with laughter that had an edge sharp enough to cut. Not there. The mercantile next door had a help wanted sign, but through the window she could see the proprietor's wife, a woman whose tight mouth and narrow eyes promised questions Eliza had no intention of answering. At the far end of town, set apart like an afterthought, stood a sprawling ranch operation. The barn was solid, well-maintained, and the corral held a dozen horses that moved with the fluid grace of well-bred stock. A painted sign hung from the gate, "Callahan Horse Ranch, stock for sale." Horses, she knew horses, had grown up with them back in Ohio, before marriage had taken her east, before life had taught her that some cages came with wedding rings instead of iron bars. She walked toward the ranch, her carpet bag bumping against her leg with each step. The sun sat low, painting everything the color of dried blood. A man emerged from the barn, carrying a saddle that he dropped on the corral fence. He was tall, broad-shouldered in the way of men who worked with their hands and backs. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked by countless small scars, the signature of anyone who dealt with horses and their occasional opinions about being handled. He noticed her approach and stilled, one hand resting on the saddle horn. His face was all planes and angles, weathered by sun and wind until it resembled the landscape itself. Dark hair, too long for fashion, fell across his forehead. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just watched her come with the patient stillness of a man who had learned to let the world reveal itself in its own time. "Mr. Callahan," she asked when she was close enough to speak without shouting. "Wade Callahan," he confirmed. His voice was deep, roughened by dust and disuse. "Something I can help you with, ma'am." "I need work." The words came out flat, matter of fact. She had rehearsed flowery speeches during the long wagon ride, but standing here in the dying light, prettiness seemed like energy wasted. "I can tend horses, mend tack, keep records if you need. I'm not asking for charity, just work." His eyes gray as winter sky took her measure. She knew what he saw, a woman perhaps shy of 30, too thin, too pale, wearing a dress that had seen better decades. A woman alone, which in itself was a story nobody wanted to hear. "I don't hire women for ranch work," he said finally. Not unkind, just stating fact like he might mention the weather. "It's hard labor, dangerous sometimes. The horses don't much care if you're tired or sore." "Neither do I." She set her carpet bag down, straightened her shoulders. I'm not looking for easy work. Mr. Callahan, just work. Why? The question was simple, but it carried weight. Most women looking for employment try the saloon or the boarding house. Maybe the mercantile if they can read and figure. I'm not most women. She met his gaze directly, something she'd learned not to do with her husband but found necessary now. I don't need folks' pity or their questions. I need a job and a place to lay my head. I'll sleep in the barn if that's what's available. Wouldn't be the first time. He studied her for a long moment, then looked away, watching his horses move in the gathering dusk. One mare, a pretty sorrel, came to the fence and pushed her nose against his shoulder. He absently stroked her neck, his calloused fingers gentle on the sleek hide. You running from something? He asked without looking at her. No, it wasn't entirely a lie. You couldn't run from something that lived inside your own skin. I'm looking for something. What's that? A place where nobody knows my name or cares to learn it, where the work I do matters more than the story I don't tell. He turned back to her then, and something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but recognizing, like calling to like, perhaps. Everyone in Dry Willow was running from something or searching for something, or both. Can you start before dawn work till past dark, handle a pitchfork and a shovel without complaining about broken nails or dirty clothes? Yes. Can you keep your mouth shut about what don't concern you and your hands off what ain't yours? Yes. He nodded slowly. $1 a week plus board. There's a tack room in the barn that's dry. You can bed down there. Breakfast is at 5. Dinner's at sundown if you're done with chores. You cook your own or go hungry? I don't provide meals beyond what I cook for myself. And I don't cook for 2. I don't need coddling. Mr. Callahan, just work. Then be here at 4 tomorrow morning. We'll see if you last the day. He picked up the saddle, turned toward the barn, then paused. What do I call you? She hesitated. She'd been Mrs. Moreland for so long. The title sat like a yoke on her shoulders. But that woman had died somewhere between Pennsylvania and here, buried in an unmarked grave of her own making. Eliza, she said finally, just Eliza. He nodded once and disappeared into the barn's shadows. She picked up her carpetbag and followed, not because she had anywhere else to go, but because for the first time in 2 years, someone had offered her exactly what she'd asked for, nothing more, nothing less. The tack room was small but clean, smelling of leather and neat's foot oil. A narrow cot occupied one corner, with a thin mattress that had seen better days but looked like luxury compared to wagon beds and cold ground. Pegs on the wall held various pieces of tack, and a small window let in the last of the dying light. She set her bag on the cot, sat beside it, and for the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, allowed her shoulders to drop. Tomorrow would be hard. The day after, harder still. But hard work had never killed anyone. It was the soft suffocation of a life lived in fear that did that. Outside, she could hear Wade Callahan moving about. The quiet murmur of his voice as he spoke to the horses. He had asked no questions beyond the practical, demanded no explanations, offered no sympathy. It was, she realized, exactly what she needed. Eliza lay back on the narrow cot, still wearing her travel-stained dress, and stared at the ceiling. Somewhere out there, people who had known her were probably wondering what had become of the preacher's wife. Let them wonder. She had work to do come morning, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The first test came before Dawn had even considered breaking. Eliza woke to the sound of something heavy hitting the barn wall outside her door once, twice, then silence. She lay still, listening. Another thud, followed by a low groan that might have been human or animal. She dressed quickly in the darkness, fingers finding buttons by memory, and stepped out into the main barn. A single lantern cast wild shadows across the stalls. At the far end, Wade Callahan knelt beside a downed horse, his hands moving over the animal's sweat-soaked flank. "Hold the lantern," he said without looking up. Not a request, a simple statement of what needed doing. She took the light, positioned it to best illuminate his work. The horse, a black gelding, lay on his side, legs rigid, eyes rolling white. Colic, most likely. Fatal if not addressed quickly. "There's a bottle of laudanum in the tack chest," Wade said, his voice tight with concentration. "And a dosing syringe." She found both, returned swift and silent. He took them without acknowledgement, his focus entirely on the suffering animal. The horse tried to thrash, and Wade laid a gentling hand on its neck, murmuring words too low to catch. "Need to get him up," he said after administering the dose. "Can't let him roll." It took both of them, Wade at the head and Eliza at the flank. Voices raised in encouragement and command to get the gelding to his feet. The horse swayed, tried to go down again, but they held him, Wade, with strength, Eliza with stubborn determination. "Walk him," Wade ordered. "Keep him moving. Don't let him stop. Don't let him drop." She took the lead rope without question. The horse was massive, probably 16 hands, and every step was a battle. She walked him up and down the barn aisle while Wade watched, arms crossed, face grim. Her shoulders burned. Her hands, soft from months of inactivity, began to blister where the rope rubbed. An hour passed, then 2. The horse's breathing eased incrementally. His steps grew steadier. Dawn light crept through the barn doors, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. Still she walked, because Wade hadn't told her to stop, and stopping might mean the horse's death. Finally, Wade stepped forward, took the rope from her raw hands. "That's enough. He'll make it now." She flexed her fingers, trying not to wince at the burning. Wade noticed, of course he did. The man noticed everything. She was learning. He disappeared into the tack room, returned with a tin of salve. "For your hands," he said, setting it on a hay bale. Then, after a pause, "You did good. Most would have given up after the first hour." The horse needed walking. She said simply, "So I walked him." He studied her with those winter-gray eyes, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being read like a familiar book. "You've done this before. With horses. I mean, my father raised Morgans back in Ohio. Before—" She caught herself, redirected. "A long time ago." He nodded, accepting the boundaries she'd drawn. "Breakfast in an hour. Then we'll see about the rest of the day's work." But when she entered the small kitchen attached to his house an hour later, she found him frowning at a skillet of what might charitably be called eggs. They were brown at the edges, watery in the middle, and smelled faintly of char. "I cook for fuel, not flavor," he said without apology, scraping the mess onto 2 plates. "Coffee's strong enough to float horseshoes, but it's hot." She took a bite of the eggs, managed not to grimace. The coffee was indeed strong enough to strip paint, but after the night's work, she was grateful for its bitter heat. They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, just the quiet of 2 people with more important things than conversation on their minds. After breakfast, he showed her the routine: stalls to be mucked, water buckets to be filled, feed to be measured and distributed. The work was hard, harder than she'd anticipated after months of enforced idleness. Her back screamed protests, her hands, even with salve, burned with new blisters forming beside the old. But she didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't complain. Wade worked alongside her, saying little. He showed her the particular needs of each horse, the mare who wouldn't drink if her bucket wasn't perfectly clean, the stallion who had to be fed separately lest he kicked the stall boards to splinters. He demonstrated the correct way to approach a skittish yearling, how to check hooves for stones, how to spot the early signs of thrush or founder. Midday came hot and still. Eliza's dress, already work-stained, clung to her back with sweat. Her hair, despite being pinned severely, escaped in damp tendrils that stuck to her neck. She was filling water buckets from the pump when Wade appeared beside her. "That dress'll kill you before the work does," he said bluntly. "Heat out here isn't kind to all that fabric." She kept pumping, watching water splash into the bucket. "It's what I have. My nephew left some clothes behind last time he visited. Boys built like a scarecrow. Might fit you well enough. Trousers and shirts, more practical for barn work." She stilled. Women in trousers was scandal enough back east to ruin reputations. But then, her reputation was already ashes. Thank you. That would be helpful." He brought the clothes after lunch: rough cotton shirts, canvas trousers, a pair of suspenders to hold them up. They were indeed too large, but she rolled the cuffs, cinched the suspenders tight, and found she could move freely for the first time in years. When she emerged from the tack room thus transformed, Wade's expression didn't change. "Better," was all he said. "Now come help me with that yearling. He's got opinions about being halter broke." The yearling, a bay colt with a white blaze, did indeed have opinions. Strong ones, expressed through kicks, bites, and a remarkable ability to plant all 4 feet and become immovable as granite. Wade worked with infinite patience, approaching and retreating, letting the colt set the pace. "Force doesn't work with horses," he said, more to himself than her. "They remember every harsh hand, every moment of fear. Trust comes slow, if it comes at all." She watched him work, noted the gentle persistence, the way he never raised his voice even when the colt caught him with a well-aimed kick to the shin. There was a philosophy in it, she thought, a way of being in the world that demanded nothing except what was freely given. By evening, every muscle in her body ached. Her hands were raw, her nails torn, her hair more down than up despite repeated attempts to pin it back. She carried the last water bucket to the trough, stumbling slightly with exhaustion. "That's enough for today," Wade said, appearing at her elbow. "Go wash up. There's a cake of soap by the pump." She wanted to finish, to prove she could complete every task, but her body betrayed her. The bucket slipped from nerveless fingers, water sloshing across her boots. She stood there, swaying slightly, furious at her own weakness. "It's not weakness," Wade said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "It's a body that's not used to the work yet. Give it time." "I can finish." "No." The word was firm, but not harsh. "Ranch work's a marathon, not a sprint. Push too hard too fast, you'll break. Then you're no good to anybody, least of all the horses." She met his eyes, saw something there besides the usual careful neutrality. Understanding, perhaps, or recognition of a fellow traveler on the hard road of learning one's own limits. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. 4 o'clock. Earlier if that black gelding takes a bad turn." She nodded, turned toward her quarters, then paused. "Mr. Callahan, thank you for the chance." He was already walking away, but his voice carried back. "Don't thank me yet. See if you still feel grateful after a week of this." Eliza washed at the pump, cold water sluicing away the day's dirt and sweat. Her reflection in the water bucket showed a face she barely recognized, sun-flushed, streaked with grime, alive in a way it hadn't been for years. She looked like a woman who worked, who earned her keep through labor instead of submission. That night, lying on the narrow cot in clothes that smelled of hay and horses instead of lavender water and resignation, she catalogued her aches like rosary beads. Each pain was proof of survival, evidence that she could build a life with her own hands. Tomorrow would hurt worse. The day after, worse still, until her body hardened to match the requirements of this new existence. But tonight, for the first time since fleeing Pennsylvania, she felt something that might have been peace, or if not peace, at least its distant cousin, the bone-deep exhaustion that came from honest work, the kind that left no room for memories or regrets. Outside, she heard Wade making his final rounds, the quiet murmur of his voice as he checked each horse, a man who spoke gentleness to animals and offered wounded women work without questions. She'd found more than employment here. She realized she'd found a place where her broken edges weren't sharp enough to matter. Tomorrow at 4, earlier if needed. She'd be ready. The weeks folded into each other like pages in a book no one was reading. Eliza's hands hardened, grew calluses thick as leather. Her body, initially rebellious, learned the rhythm of ranch work, the early morning feeding, the midday water haul, the evening rounds that ended only when every horse was settled and secure. Wade watched her transformation with the same quiet attention he gave his horses. He noted when she stopped wincing at the weight of feed sacks, when her gait steadied under the burden of water buckets, when she began anticipating the horse's needs before being told. He said nothing about these observations, but sometimes she caught him almost nodding, as if confirming something to himself. It was the third week when everything shifted. She was cleaning tack in the barn's relative coolness, working saddle soap into leather that had seen better decades. When she heard the thunder of hooves, not the measured pace of a controlled ride, but the wild drumming of panic, she dropped the bridle and ran outside. A horse not one of theirs came careening down the road, stirrups flying, reins trailing. The saddle was empty, askew, and dark with what looked disturbingly like blood. Behind it, Wade emerged from the far pasture at a dead run, his long legs covering ground with surprising speed. The horse, a gray mare, tried to veer past the ranch entrance, but Eliza stepped into the road, arms spread wide. Dangerous, foolish even. But instinct overrode sense. The mare skidded, wheeled, and in that moment of hesitation, Wade caught the trailing reins. "Easy, easy," he murmured, though whether to the horse or Eliza, she couldn't tell. The mare stood trembling, foam dripping from her bit, sides heaving. The saddle was indeed blood-stained, and fresh scratches scored the animal's flanks. "That's Doc Morrison's mare," Wade said grimly. He was already checking the horse for injuries, hands moving with practiced efficiency. "He was heading out to the Hartley place this morning. Martha Hartley's been poorly." Eliza understood immediately. A doctor on horse somewhere between town and the outlying ranches, possibly injured, certainly in need of help. "Should we search?" "I'll search. You stay here, tend the mare, and—" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. She softened it with explanation. "Two can cover more ground than one, and if he's hurt bad, you'll need hands to help move him." Wade's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Can you ride?" "Since I was 5. He saddled 2 horses with economical movements, his own rangy chestnut and the sorrel mare who'd taken to following Eliza during her chores. They mounted and headed out, following the gray mare's back trail. The blood drops in the dust told their own story, leading them north toward Willow Creek. They found Doc Morrison 2 miles out, crumpled beside a wash where flash flood debris created natural hazards. His leg bent at an angle that made Eliza's stomach turn, and blood seeped through his torn shirt. But he was conscious, attempting to drag himself toward the slim shade of a mesquite. "Thank God," he gasped as they dismounted. "Spooked at a rattler. Went down hard." Wade knelt beside him, assessing damages with the same careful touch he used on injured horses. "Legs broke, ribs too, likely. That gash needs tending." "My bag," Doc Morrison gestured weakly. "Landed somewhere." Eliza found it tangled in sagebrush, the contents scattered but mostly intact. She brought it to Wade, who was already fashioning a splint from branches and strips torn from his own shirt. Together, they worked, Wade stabilizing the leg while Eliza cleaned and bound the gash along the doctor's ribs. Her hands moved without hesitation, remembered skills from a lifetime ago when she'd helped her mother tend the inevitable injuries of farm life. "You've done this before," Doc Morrison observed through gritted teeth. "Some," Eliza allowed, concentrating on the bandaging. Getting him onto Wade's horse took all 3 of them working together, the doctor pale and sweating with pain despite the laudanum dose from his own supplies. Wade mounted behind him, holding him steady, while Eliza led the chestnut and rode the sorrel. The journey back seemed endless. Doc Morrison drifted in and out of consciousness, maintained upright only by Wade's steady grip. Eliza pushed ahead to alert the town, finding the blacksmith first a mountain of a man named Henrik who doubled as bone setter when Doc Morrison wasn't available. By the time Wade arrived with the injured doctor, a small crowd had gathered. They transferred Doc Morrison to a wagon bed lined with blankets, Henrik taking charge with gruff efficiency. But as the wagon pulled away toward the doctor's house, Eliza noticed the looks curious, speculative, measuring. She'd been invisible for 3 weeks. Just Callahan's strange hired hand who dressed like a man and kept to herself. Now she'd ridden in like something out of a dime novel, partnered with Wade in rescue, competent in crisis. Invisible was no longer an option. That was well done, Wade said quietly as the crowd dispersed. They were walking the tired horses back to the ranch, side by side in the afternoon heat. The bandaging especially, clean work. My mother was a midwife, Eliza found herself saying. I learned young. Useful skill. He paused, seemed to wrestle with words. You didn't have to ride out, could have stayed safe at the ranch. Safe's a relative term, she said, thinking of all the ways safety could become its own prison. Besides, the horses needed tending, and you needed help. Simple as that. He made a sound that might have been agreement or something else. They finished the walk in companionable silence, but Eliza felt something had changed between them. She'd proven herself not just as ranch hand, but as someone who could be counted on when circumstances turned dark. It mattered, though she couldn't say precisely why. That evening, she found a package on her cot, brown paper tied with string. Inside were 2 new shirts, sturdy cotton in practical colors, sized to actually fit rather than hang loose. A note in Wade's angular script read simply, "For the work ahead." She held the shirts against herself, noted how they'd been chosen with thought to both function and modesty. High collars, long sleeves, but cut to allow movement, not charity. She realized. Recognition. She'd earned her place here, and these were the tools of her trade. Outside, she could hear Wade in his evening ritual, voice low and steady as he moved from stall to stall. She folded the shirts carefully, placed them with her few belongings, and went to help with the night feeding. He glanced up when she entered, and for just a moment, something warm flickered in those winter-gray eyes. Sorrel mare did good today, he said, steady under pressure. Think she's taken to you. She's a good horse. Eliza agreed, measuring oats into buckets. Smart, willing, just needed someone to see it. Most creatures are like that, Wade said. And she had the feeling they weren't talking about horses anymore. Just need someone to see what's already there. They worked through the evening chores together, a partnership now rather than employer and employee. When full dark came and she retired to her quarters, Eliza caught herself humming some half-remembered tune from childhood. She stopped, startled by the sound. When had she last made music? Even such a poor attempt? That night, she dreamed not of the past but of horses running free across endless grassland. And when she woke at 4 for the morning feeding, the dream's contentment lingered like perfume. Doc Morrison would recover. Henrik had sent word. The horses were healthy and thriving. And she, Eliza, who was learning to be just Eliza, had found work that mattered and a place where her competence was valued above her history. It wasn't happiness, exactly. She'd learned not to trust that fickle emotion. But it was something solid and real, built one task at a time, one day at a time. And for now, that was enough. Wade was already in the barn when she arrived, checking the black gelding who'd colicked that first night. He looked up at her approach, and she saw he was almost smiling, just a slight lift at the corner of his mouth. But on his weathered face, it was like sunrise. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, and picked up the pitchfork to begin the day's work. The storm rolled in from the west like God's own fury, black clouds piling up against the horizon until they blotted out the late afternoon sun. Eliza felt the pressure change in her bones, saw the horses grow restless in their stalls, ears flicking at sounds only they could hear. "Going to be a bad one," Wade said, squinting at the sky. They'd been working on repairing a section of fence the bull from the neighboring ranch had taken exception to. Need to get the horses secured. They worked with swift efficiency, double-checking latches, ensuring water buckets were full, but not so full they'd slosh and soak the bedding if the wind got fierce. The yearling colt, still half wild despite weeks of patient handling, rolled his eyes and pawed at his stall door. "He'll hurt himself," Eliza said, watching the colt's increasing agitation. Wade considered. "Best bring him into the main barn. That back stall's too exposed if this wind gets as bad as I think it will." Moving a frightened horse in rising wind was no easy task. The colt planted his feet, tossed his head, and when a piece of loose tin roofing began banging somewhere in the distance, he reared. The lead rope burned through Eliza's hands as he jerked backward. "Let him go," Wade commanded, but she held on, speaking low and steady. Nonsense words meant to soothe. The colt came down, trembling, and in that moment of uncertainty, she stepped close to his shoulder. "You're all right," she murmured, one hand on his neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the sweat-dampened hide. "Just a bit of weather, nothing you can't handle." Wade moved to the colt's other side, and together they formed a corridor of calm, walking him step by careful step to the main barn. Lightning split the sky just as they got him inside, thunder following so close it shook the walls. The colt tried to bolt, but they held him, and finally got him into the larger, more secure stall. "That was well done," Wade said, checking the rope burns on her palms. His fingers were gentle but thorough, turning her hands to catch the light. "These need tending." "After the storm," she said, pulling away. Something about his touch careful, clinical, but somehow intimate made her nervous in ways that had nothing to do with fear. "The new saddle needs covering, and I'll see to it." He was already moving, gathering what needed protecting from the storm. "You check the barn doors. Make sure everything's battened down." They finished just as the rain hit, fat drops that quickly became a deluge. They stood in the barn doorway, watching water pour off the roof in sheets, turning the yard into a muddy lake within minutes. "Looks like we're stuck here a while," Wade observed. The rain was so loud they had to raise their voices to be heard. "Could be worse. At least the roof's sound." As if to test his words, wind gusted hard enough to rattle the walls. Something crashed outside a tree branch, maybe, or another piece of loose roofing. The horses shifted nervously, but held steady, trusting in the security of their shelter. "Hungry?" Wade asked after a while. "Got some jerky and hardtack in the tack room. Not fancy, but it's food." They sat on grain sacks, sharing the simple meal while storm fury raged outside. The tack room felt smaller with both of them in it, intimate in the lamplight. Eliza was acutely aware of Wade's presence the way he sat with that loose-limbed ease, how his hands moved with unconscious grace, even in simple tasks like cutting jerky with his pocket knife. "You never said where you learned to handle horses," he said, offering her a piece of the dried meat. "That trick with the colt moving to his shoulder like that takes confidence." "My father," she said, surprised to find the memory didn't sting as it once had. "He said horses were like people push too hard and they push back, but if you stand quiet in the right spot, they'll usually choose to follow." "Smart man." Wade leaned back against the wall, studying her in the lamplight. "He's still in Ohio." "Dead. 8 years now." She took a breath, decided on honesty. "Mother, too, the year after, lung fever." "I'm sorry." "It was a long time ago." She paused, then found herself adding, "They died before I made choices they wouldn't have understood." He nodded, accepting this glimpse beneath her armor without pushing for more. "Families are complicated. My father wanted me to be a lawyer, said I had the mind for it, just needed to apply myself. Couldn't understand why I'd rather work with horses than arguments." "Do you regret it?" "No." His answer was immediate. Certain. "This is what I'm meant to do. Some people are born knowing their place in the world. Others have to find it." He looked at her directly. "Or build it from scratch." Thunder crashed directly overhead, making them both jump. The sorrel mare whinnied, and Eliza rose automatically to check on her. Wade followed, and they made rounds of all the horses, offering touches and quiet words of reassurance. At the yearling's stall, Wade produced a curry brush. Might as well make use of the time. He needs to get used to being handled when he's nervous. You want to groom him now, in the middle of this? Best time for it. He's already scared. If he learns that being scared doesn't mean the world ends, that hands can bring comfort even when everything's chaos. He shrugged. Useful lesson. He entered the stall slowly, talking low. The colt pressed against the far wall, but Wade simply stood there, brush in hand, waiting. Gradually, the colt's curiosity won out. He stretched his neck, nostrils working, and Wade let him investigate the brush. Your turn, Wade said, handing her the brush and stepping aside. She took his place, moving with the same patient deliberation. The colt snorted but didn't retreat. Slowly, carefully, she began brushing his shoulder, feeling the muscles gradually relax under the rhythmic strokes. That's it, Wade murmured, and she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. Just like that, lightning illuminated the barn in stark relief. Thunder following close. The colt startled but didn't pull away. Eliza kept brushing, steady and calm, until his head dropped and he sighed that deep, releasing breath that meant acceptance. When she finally left the stall, Wade was smiling a real smile that transformed his weathered features. You've got good hands, he said. Good instincts, too. Their eyes met and held for a moment too long. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks and turned away, busying herself with hanging up the brush. Behind her, she heard Wade clear his throat. Storm's passing, he said unnecessarily. Indeed, the thunder was growing distant, the rain slackening from deluge to shower. Be dark soon, though. Best wait till morning to head back to the house. She nodded, not trusting her voice. There was something in the air between them, fragile as spun glass and just as dangerous. She'd felt it building for days in the way he watched her work, in how their hands sometimes brushed when reaching for the same tool, in the comfortable silences that had replaced their initial wariness. Eliza, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded different than when others said it, weightier, more real. But whatever he might have said was cut off by hoofbeats in the yard. They both moved to the door to see a rider splashing through the mud, horse lathered and blowing hard. Wade Callahan, the rider called. Message from town. They need help. Flash flood took out the bridge. Folks trapped on the other side. Wade was already moving, gathering ropes and supplies. How many? Dozen, maybe more, including the schoolmarm and some kids coming back from a picnic. Eliza's blood chilled. Children in danger changed everything. I'm coming, she said. Wade paused in his preparations. It'll be dangerous. I know. She was already reaching for her coat. But you'll need every hand you can get. He nodded, accepting her decision without argument, another thing she appreciated about him. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding through the storm's aftermath, joined by other men from neighboring ranches as word spread. The scene at the creek was worse than expected. What was usually a docile stream had become a raging torrent, brown with runoff and debris. On the far side, huddled on a shrinking island of high ground, were the stranded travelers. Even in the dying light, Eliza could see the small figures of children clinging to their teachers' skirts. Rope's the only way, someone said. But that current... Wade was already stripping off his gun belt and boots. I'll take it across. Like hell you will, said another rancher. That's suicide. But Eliza knew that look in Wade's eyes, the same steady determination he showed with frightened horses. He'd made his decision. You'll need an anchor on this side, she said quietly. Someone who can hold if the current takes you. Their eyes met. You're not strong enough. Not alone, but I know knots that'll hold. She was already fashioning a complex anchor system she'd learned from her father. using both horses and hastily driven stakes. Trust me. He did. That was the miracle of it. Without another word, he took the rope and waded into the torrent. The rescue took hours. Wade made it across, though twice the current nearly claimed him, and Eliza's carefully rigged anchor system was all that kept him from being swept downstream. Once the rope was secured, they ferried the stranded group across one by one, children first, clutching the rope with white-knuckled terror while Wade guided them through the worst of the current. Eliza worked the anchor line until her hands bled through the barely healed blisters, but she didn't let go. Not when little Sarah Morrison, Doc Morrison's granddaughter, slipped and went under for heart-stopping seconds before Wade hauled her up. Not when the schoolmarm, Miss Catherine Wells, froze midstream with panic until Wade literally carried her the rest of the way. Not even when her arms shook with exhaustion and black spots danced at the edges of her vision. When the last child was safe on solid ground, when Wade finally dragged himself from the water and collapsed on the bank. She allowed herself to sink to her knees. The rope fell from nerveless fingers, and she stared at her palms torn, bloody but triumphant. "Let me see," Wade said, suddenly beside her despite his own exhaustion. Water still streamed from his clothes, and he shivered in the evening air. But his attention was entirely on her damaged hands. "They're fine," she started to say, but he was already producing a bandana from somewhere, gently cleaning the worst of the blood. His touch was infinitely careful, and she found herself fighting tears not from pain, but from the simple kindness of it. "You held," he said quietly, wrapping the makeshift bandage. "When I went under that second time, felt the rope go tight, knew you were holding." He looked up at her, those gray eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "Thank you." Around them, families reunited with tears and laughter. Someone had brought blankets, and fires were being kindled despite the damp. But Eliza was aware only of Wade's hands on hers, the warmth of him despite his soaked state, the way he looked at her like she was something precious and unexpected. Wade, Eliza. Henrik, the blacksmith, appeared with blankets and a flask of something that smelled strong enough to strip paint. "You two are heroes. By God, come. There's food at my wagon and dry clothes." The moment shattered. Wade helped her to her feet, and they were swept into the crowd of grateful townspeople. Children hugged her legs. Parents pumped her sore hands. And through it all, she felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with her torn palms or muddy clothes. These people knew her now. Not her history, not her secrets, but her, the woman who'd held the line while their children were saved. She couldn't be invisible anymore. Couldn't be just the strange woman who worked at the Callahan Ranch. She had a place in their community, whether she'd sought it or not. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them wrapped in borrowed blankets, exhausted beyond words. But when they reached the barn, Wade dismounted and came to help her down, his hands steady on her waist as she half fell from the saddle. "You should sleep in the house tonight," he said. "That cot's no place for someone who—" He stopped, jaw working. "Just the house. There's a proper bed in the spare room." She was too tired to argue, too tired to maintain the careful distance she'd cultivated. She nodded and let him guide her not to the barn, but to his house, a modest two-room structure she'd only entered for meals. The spare room was small but clean, with an iron bedstead and a quilt that looked handmade. Wade lit the lamp, built up the fire in the small stove, and stood awkwardly in the doorway. "There's water in the pitcher. I'll heat some for washing, and I'll find something for your hands, proper bandages and salve." "Wade." His name stopped him as he turned to go. "What you did tonight?" "What we did," he corrected firmly. "Couldn't have managed without you." She wanted to say more, to find words for the feeling that expanded in her chest when he looked at her like that. But exhaustion and old habits kept her silent. He seemed to understand, nodding once before disappearing into the main room. She washed as best she could with her damaged hands, changed into the clean shirt he'd left on the bed, one of his, she realized, soft with wear and smelling faintly of saddle soap and hay. When she emerged, she found him by the stove, heating something in a pot. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the table. "Need to tend those hands properly." She sat, watched him work with the same careful competence he brought to everything. The salve stung at first, then soothed. He wrapped each palm in clean white bandages, his touch clinical but gentle. "You've done this before," she observed. "Tending wounds. Had to learn, no doctor for miles when I first came here. Horses don't wait for convenient times to get hurt." He finished the last bandage, but didn't immediately release her hand. "People either—" They sat there in lamplight, her bandaged hands resting in his, and the air grew thick with unspoken things. She could feel calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers, the careful way he held her like something that might break or flee. "Eliza," he said, voice low and rough, "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you run." Her heart stuttered, but she nodded. "I know you're running from something, or someone. I've known since the day you showed up here, too thin and too scared, but too proud to admit either." His thumb moved across her bandaged palm, the lightest touch. "I don't care what it was. That's your business. But I need you to know you're safe here, not just from work or weather, but from whatever sent you running in the first place." She felt tears prick her eyes, blamed it on exhaustion and pain. "You don't know." "I don't need to know, unless you want to tell me. What I need is for you to understand that you've got a place here as long as you want it, not just as a hired hand." He took a breath, seemed to steel himself. "I'm not good with words, never have been. Better with horses than people. But these past weeks, having you here, the ranch feels different. I feel different." "Wade, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "God knows you've got reason enough not to trust men or their intentions. Just wanted you to know where I stand, where you stand with me." She turned her hands in his, gripped his fingers despite the pain it caused. "I was married," she said, the words scraping past years of silence, "to a man everyone thought was good, godly, upstanding." She laughed, bitter and short. Behind closed doors, he was something else. When he died accident, they said, though I wondered sometimes if God just got tired of the hypocrisy everyone expected me to mourn, to remarry, to be grateful for another chance at being some man's property. Wade's hands tightened on hers, but he didn't speak. "I ran instead. Took what little money I'd hidden away and ran until I couldn't anymore. Ended up here because the horse couldn't go any farther and neither could I." She met his eyes, forced herself to hold that steady gray gaze. "I'm not looking to be saved, not looking to be someone's redemption project or second chance at happiness. I just wanted to work and be left alone." And now, the question hung between them like morning mist. She thought of the past weeks, the quiet companionship, the shared labor, the way he looked at her like she was complete exactly as she was. "Now I don't know," she admitted. "When you went into that water tonight, when I thought the current might take you." She stopped, unable to finish. "I knew you'd hold," he said simply. "Knew it sure as breathing. That's what I'm trying to say. Eliza, maybe saying it badly, but you don't have to run anymore. Not from me, not from this place. You've made your stand here, and I'll back it against anyone who tries to say different." The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. He rose, came around the table, and very carefully pulled her against his chest. She tensed for a moment, old habit, old fear, then let herself lean into his warmth. He smelled of river water and horse and something indefinably Wade, and his arms around her felt nothing like a cage. "I'm not him," he murmured into her hair. "Whatever he did, however he made you feel, I'm not him. Need you to know that." "I know," she whispered against his shirt, and she did. Wade Callahan was as different from her late husband as drought from flood, as different as honest earth from polished marble. "I know." They stayed like that until the lamp burned low. until exhaustion forced them apart. He walked her to the spare room, hesitated at the threshold. "Thank you," she said, "for tonight, for all of it." He nodded, started to go, then turned back. "Meant what I said. You've got a place here, however you want it to be." After he left, she lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to him move about in the next room. Her hands throbbed despite the bandages, and every muscle ached from the night's exertions. But beneath the physical pain was something else, a warmth that had nothing to do with the quilts or the stove. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, she felt not just safe but seen, not as the preacher's widow or the strange woman in trousers, but as herself, Eliza, who could hold a rope against floodwaters, who could gentle a frightened colt, who could choose to stop running. Tomorrow would bring questions, challenges, the weight of a community's expectations. But tonight, in Wade Callahan's spare room with her torn hands wrapped in his careful bandages, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd run far enough. Winter crept into the valley like a cautious visitor, frost silvering the grass each morning before the sun burned it away. Eliza's hands healed, leaving new scars to join the old, and she moved back to the tack room despite Wade's quiet offer of the house's spare room becoming permanent. She needed the space, the solitude to sort through feelings that tangled like wind-knotted rope. But something had shifted between them that night of the flood. They worked together with an easier rhythm now, conversations flowing natural as water. Wade smiled more, small things that transformed his weathered face. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her chest tight with equal parts want and wariness. The change in weather brought changes in routine. Horses needed extra feed to keep warm. Water buckets required breaking ice each morning, and the barn demanded constant vigilance against drafts that could sicken valuable stock. They worked dawn to dusk, preparing for the hard months ahead. It was a bitter morning in early December when sickness struck. The sorrel mare, Eliza's favorite, the one who'd carried her during the rescue, stood with her head low, coat dull and staring. Her breathing came labored, and when Eliza pressed an ear to her side, she heard the telltale rattle of lung infection. "How long?" Wade asked, running practiced hands over the mare. "Found her like this at morning feed. She was fine yesterday." Eliza tried to keep the worry from her voice. Horses could go from healthy to critical fast, and lung infections in winter were often death sentences. Wade's expression was grim. "Seen this before. Moves through a herd like wildfire if we're not careful. Need to isolate her. Treat what we can. And pray." They moved the mare to the small shed behind the main barn, far from the other horses. Wade showed Eliza how to prepare the mustard plaster for her chest, how to mix the tonic of whiskey and herbs that might ease her breathing. But he was honest about the chances. Maybe 1 in 3 pulls through. Depends on how strong they are, how much fight they've got left. Eliza thought of the mare's steady courage during the flood rescue, her gentle nature and willing heart. She's got fight. Then we give her a chance to use it. What followed were some of the longest days Eliza had known. She moved her bedding to the shed, unwilling to leave the mare alone in her struggle. Wade protested at first the shed was barely warmer than outside, and she'd be breathing the same bad air. But something in her expression stopped his arguments. "I'll bring extra blankets," was all he said. She spent hours sitting in the straw beside the mare, talking nonsense and memories, keeping her company through the worst of the fever. Wade appeared at regular intervals with food she barely touched. Fresh water, more blankets. He'd check the mare's condition, adjust treatments, then settle beside Eliza for a while. "You don't have to stay," she told him one midnight, when wind howled through the shed's gaps and their breath fogged in the lamplight. "I know." He pulled a horse blanket around both their shoulders, careful not to presume too much closeness. "But seems like you shouldn't be alone with this. Neither of you." On the third night, when the mare's breathing grew so labored that each inhale sounded like drowning, Eliza finally broke. The tears came silent and steady. For the horse and for herself, and for every living thing that struggled to breathe in a world that seemed determined to suffocate. Wade didn't speak, didn't offer empty comfort. He just shifted closer, let her lean into his warmth while the mare fought for each breath. His hand found hers in the darkness, calloused fingers interlacing with careful tenderness. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "Not the horse, the woman you were before." She stiffened, but his thumb traced gentle circles on her palm, patient and undemanding. "I played piano," she heard herself say. "Before. Every Sunday in church. Wednesday prayer meetings, too. I loved it the way music could lift people up, make them feel things beyond words." She laughed, bitter and soft. "He said it made me proud, that I enjoyed the attention too much. So he had the piano moved to the parsonage basement where I could practice in proper humility." Wade's hand tightened on hers, but he didn't interrupt. Then he decided even that was too much, said my playing distracted from the sermon, from God's word. So I stopped, told everyone I'd injured my hands, couldn't play anymore. She flexed her fingers, remembering. Eventually it became true. These hands forgot how to make music, only know work now. "That's not true," Wade said. "Seen you with the horses, the way you touch them, calm them, that's its own kind of music. Just different instruments." The mare's breathing hitched, steadied, hitched again. Eliza rose to apply more mustard plaster, hands moving with practiced care despite their trembling. Wade helped, holding the mare's head while she worked. "Why'd you stay?" he asked when they'd settled back in the straw. "With him, I mean, you're strong enough to have left sooner." She was quiet so long he probably thought she wouldn't answer. "Fear," she finally admitted. "Not of him, exactly, of what leaving meant. Who'd believe the preacher's wife over the preacher? Where would I go? What would I become?" She gestured around the shed, half smiling in the darkness. "Turns out I became this, someone who sits in the cold trying to save a horse that probably can't be saved. Maybe that's who I always was, underneath." "Nothing wrong with fighting for something worth saving," Wade said. "Even when the odds are against you, especially then." Dawn came gray and grudging. The mare still breathed, but barely. Eliza had dozed against Wade's shoulder, waking to find his arm around her, holding her steady even in sleep. She didn't pull away. There was something honest about unconscious gestures, something that couldn't lie. "Her breathing's different," Wade said, instantly alert. Eliza scrambled to the mare's side, heart sinking. But as she listened, she realized he was right. The breathing was different, deeper. The terrible rattle had lessened, and when the mare opened her eyes, they held a clarity that hadn't been there for days. "Well, I'll be damned." Wade breathed. "Excuse my language, but I think she's turned the corner." The mare lived. It took weeks more of careful nursing, gradual exercise, special feeds to rebuild her strength. But she lived and thrived, and by Christmas was nickering for treats like nothing had ever happened. "You saved her," Wade said one evening as they watched the mare play in the snow-dusted paddock, kicking up her heels like a yearling. "We saved her," Eliza corrected. "No," his voice was firm. "I know horses, no treatments, but you gave her something I couldn't. Reason to fight, same way you've given me." He stopped, color rising under his weathered skin. "It given you what?" He turned to face her fully, and she saw he'd made some decision. Reason to want more than just existing. This ranch, these horses, they were enough before. Good life, useful work. But now, he lifted a hand, almost touched her face. "Let it fall. Now I find myself thinking about music and spare rooms and what it might be like to not eat supper alone." The words hung between them like ice crystals, beautiful and fragile. Eliza felt her chest tight with familiar fear, but underneath it, something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I don't know if I can be what you're thinking," she said carefully. "I'm not whole. there are parts of me that might never work right again." "Don't need you to be anything but who you are," Wade said. "That's plenty. More than plenty." The mare whinnied, demanding attention, breaking the moment. They went to her, fed her the apples they'd brought, stood side by side in comfortable silence while snow began to fall. Eliza found herself leaning slightly toward Wade, and he toward her, neither quite touching but both acknowledging the pull between them. That night, she lay in the tack room listening to winds sing through the rafters. Her hands, when she held them up in the darkness, looked strange to her, scarred and calloused, but strong, capable. They might not remember piano keys, but they knew rope and leather, fence wire and curry combs. They knew how to hold a sick mare's head, how to anchor a lifeline against floodwaters, how to hold on when holding on seemed impossible. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. Christmas came and went with a little fanfare at the ranch. Wade gave Eliza a new bridle he'd crafted himself, the leather tooled with delicate patterns of running horses. She reciprocated with a shirt she'd sewn from fabric bought with her carefully saved wages, the stitches straight and true. They ate a simple meal together, and if their hands brushed when passing dishes, neither acknowledged it aloud. By late January, the ranch had settled into winter's rhythm, but the peace shattered on a Tuesday afternoon when Wade announced he needed supplies from town. "I can manage here," Eliza said, not looking up from the harness she was mending. Town meant people, questions, eyes that saw too much. "Need you to come," Wade said, something odd in his voice. "Got to order feed for spring, and you know the horses' needs better than anyone now. Besides, the mercantile has fabric. You could use another work shirt." She wanted to refuse, but the logic was sound, and a part of her, a part growing stronger daily, was tired of hiding. The ride to town was quiet, both bundled against the cold. Main Street looked different in winter, smoke rising from every chimney, snowdrifts softening the harsh angles of buildings. People hurried between shops, heads down against the wind. At the mercantile, Mrs. Garrett, the proprietor's wife with the narrow eyes, looked up sharply when they entered. Her gaze traveled from Wade to Eliza, taking in their easy proximity, the way Wade helped her from her coat without thinking. Mr. Callahan," she said, voice sweet as sorghum and just as sticky. "And, Eliza, isn't it we haven't seen you in town for months, beginning to wonder if you'd taken ill out at that ranch." "I've been well," Eliza said evenly. "Thank you for your concern." Wade moved to the counter to discuss feed orders with Mr. Garrett, leaving Eliza to browse the fabric. She was examining a practical brown cotton when Mrs. Garrett appeared at her elbow. "Such a blessing, Mr. Callahan taking you on," the woman said. "Christian charity at its finest. Though I do wonder what your late husband would think. You working like a common laborer. A preacher's widow should maintain certain standards." Eliza's hand stilled on the fabric. "My husband is dead, Mrs. Garrett. His opinions no longer concern me." Still, the woman's voice dropped, confidential and cutting. "People talk. A woman alone, living on a bachelor's property, wearing men's clothing. It gives certain impressions." "Does it?" Eliza turned to face her fully. "And what impression does it give when a woman with too much time and too little charity spreads gossip in a mercantile?" "Mrs. Garrett's face flushed ugly red. "Well, I never—" "No," Eliza agreed. "You never worked a day of honest labor, never held a rope while lives hung in the balance, never sat through a cold night trying to save something worth saving. So perhaps your impressions matter less than you think." She turned back to the fabric, hands trembling but voice steady. Behind her, Mrs. Garrett huffed and retreated. When Eliza looked up, she found Wade watching from across the store, something fierce and proud in his expression. They completed their business quickly after that, but as they prepared to leave, the bell above the door chimed. A man entered, tall, well-dressed despite the frontier setting. with pale eyes that swept the store with proprietorial confidence. Eliza froze. She knew that type of man, that way of claiming space. Her late husband had carried himself just so, as if the world existed for his convenience. Wade Callahan. The stranger's voice was cultured, Eastern. "I'm told you're the man to see about horses." "Depends what you're looking for," Wade said carefully. "Quality stock. I'm establishing a ranch north of here. The name's Dalton, Thomas Dalton." His gaze found Eliza, lingered. "And who might this be?" "My assistant trainer," Wade said before Eliza could answer. "Best hand with horses I've seen." Dalton stepped closer, and Eliza fought the urge to retreat. "Assistant trainer, how progressive. I don't believe I caught your name. Miss." "She didn't offer it?" Wade said, moving subtly between them. "Now, about those horses. Why don't you come by the ranch Thursday? We can discuss your needs." Dalton's smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened. "Of course, though I hope your assistant will be present. I'm curious about her methods." After he left, Eliza realized she was shaking. Wade guided her outside, helped her onto the wagon. They were halfway home before she could speak. "He reminded me." "I know." Wade's knuckles were white on the reins. "Saw it in your face. Men like that, they're all cut from the same cloth." "He'll come Thursday." "Let him. He'll find nothing but a working ranch and professional service." He glanced at her. "You don't have to be there. I can handle him alone." "No." The word came firm. "I won't hide. Not anymore. You were right. I know those horses better than anyone. If he wants to buy, he'll deal with both of us." Wade nodded slowly. "That's my girl." The words slipped out natural as breathing, but they both heard them. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks despite the cold. Wade cleared his throat. "That is, I meant—" "I know what you meant," she said softly. Thursday arrived with a bitter wind and lowering clouds. Dalton appeared at the appointed time, accompanied by two silent men who looked more like enforcers than ranch hands. He dismounted with studied elegance, gaze immediately finding Eliza where she worked with the yearling in the corral. "Ah, the mysterious assistant," he called. "I've been asking about you in town. Fascinating story. A widow who abandons her mourning to play with horses. Quite the transformation." "Nothing mysterious about honest work," Eliza replied, not pausing in her training. Wade emerged from the barn, and they began the business of showing horses. Dalton asked pointed questions, many directed at Eliza, clearly trying to unsettle her, but she answered with calm expertise, letting her knowledge speak louder than his insinuations. It was going well until Dalton decided to test a spirited stallion himself. Despite Wade's warnings about the horse's temperament, he insisted on riding. The stallion, sensing inexperienced arrogance, promptly deposited him in the dirt. Dalton rose, face dark with humiliation. "That animal is vicious, ought to be destroyed." "Horse is fine." Wade said, "Rider needed work." The insult hung in the air. Dalton stepped close to Wade. "Too close. You'd do well to watch your tongue. Callahan, and your choice of company. I know all about her, the preacher's wife who couldn't keep her husband satisfied, who drove him to—" He never finished. Wade's fist connected with his jaw, sending him back into the dirt. Dalton's men started forward, but Wade's hand moved to his holstered pistol, and they reconsidered. "Get off my land," Wade said, voice deadly quiet. "Don't come back. Don't speak her name again. Don't even think it." Dalton struggled to his feet, holding his jaw. "You'll regret this, Callahan. Both of you. I'll make sure of it." After they left, Wade flexed his knuckles, wincing. Eliza caught his hand, examining the split skin. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. "Yes, I should have." He cupped her face with his other hand, thumb brushing her cheek. "Nobody talks about you that way, not while I'm breathing." She covered his hand with hers, leaned into the touch. I'm not worth the trouble he'll bring. You're worth any trouble, Wade said fiercely. All of it. Don't you know that by now? Standing there in the cold corral, with storm clouds gathering and the promise of hardship ahead, Eliza felt something crack open inside her chest, not breaking, mending, like ice giving way to spring water. I'm starting to, she admitted. He kissed her then, careful and thorough, like he did everything. She kissed him back, tasting promise and possibility, and the salt of tears she hadn't realized were falling. When they broke apart, the first snow was beginning to fall. Wade rested his forehead against hers. Whatever Dalton tries, whatever anyone says, we'll face it together. If you'll have me. I'm not easy to have, she warned. There are still nights I wake up afraid, days I flinch at shadows, parts of me that might never heal right. Then we'll be broken together, he said simply. Seems to me two broken pieces might make something whole, given time and patience. She thought of the mare who'd survived against odds, of rivers crossed and trust rebuilt one day at a time, of hands that had forgotten music but learned new songs in rope and leather and the satisfied sigh of well-tended horses. Yes, she said, together. The snow fell harder, but neither moved. There would be consequences for today, Dalton would make sure of it. But right now, in this moment, she stood in the circle of Wade's arms and felt, for the first time in years, like she could breathe, like she was home. Thomas Dalton's revenge came in the form of paper and law. As such, men's revenge often did. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Sheriff McKenna rode out to the ranch with a grim expression and an official-looking document. Wade, he greeted, dismounting heavily. His gaze found Eliza where she stood by the barn, and something apologetic flickered across his weathered features. Ma'am, afraid this isn't a social call. Wade stepped forward, but his eyes never left the paper in McKenna's hand. What's he done? Mr. Dalton's filed a complaint. Says you assaulted him without provocation. He's also... McKenna shifted uncomfortably. Raised questions about the propriety of your living arrangements here. Claims there might be moral violations occurring. That's ridiculous, Wade said flatly. Course it is, but Dalton's got money and connections back east. He's pushing for an investigation. Judge Harris says I got to look into it. McKenna's voice dropped. I'm sorry, Wade. My hands are tied. Eliza felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She'd been foolish to think she could escape. That distance, a new purpose, could shield her from judgment. What kind of investigation? McKenna wouldn't meet her eyes. Into whether improper relations are occurring, whether you're truly employed here or if other arrangements exist. Dalton suggesting this might be a case for the morality statutes. She works for me, Wade said, voice hard as iron. Nothing improper about it. I know that. Most folks know that. But the law requires... McKenna stopped, started again. Ma'am, I'll need to ask you some questions, official-like, and there'll need to be supervision, someone from town, a respectable woman, to stay here for a spell. Make sure everything's proper. Like a chaperone, Eliza's voice came out bitter. I'm not a child, Sheriff. No, ma'am, but that's what Judge Harris ordered. He looked truly miserable now. Mrs. Palmer from the church board volunteered. She'll be out tomorrow. After McKenna left, Wade slammed his fist into the barn wall, making the horses startle. This is my fault. Should have controlled my temper. Should have... Stop! Eliza caught his hand, examining the knuckles he'd just bloodied. We both knew something like this might happen. Men like Dalton don't take humiliation well. We'll fight it. I'll hire a lawyer. Best money can buy. With what money? She gentled her voice. Wade, be practical. Fighting Dalton in court would take everything. The ranch, the horses, all of it. Then that's what it takes. He cupped her face, desperate. I won't let them, won't let him. Maybe we don't fight, she said slowly, hating the words even as they formed. Maybe I leave, find work elsewhere, without me here. His complaint falls apart. No. Wade's response was immediate, fierce. That's not happening. You think I'd let him drive you off? You think I'd choose this ranch over— He stopped, breathing hard. Over you. Mrs. Abigail Palmer arrived the next morning like judgment incarnate, tall, severe, dressed in black despite the unseasonable warmth of early March. She took one look at Eliza in her work clothes and sniffed with profound disapproval. I see the reports were not exaggerated, she announced. A woman in trousers, working like a field hand. It's unnatural. What's unnatural? Eliza said evenly. Is judging someone's morality by their clothing. Mrs. Palmer's eyes narrowed. I'm here to observe and report, not to debate. I'll be requiring a room in the main house. You, I assume, have quarters in the barn. The tack room, Eliza confirmed. Mrs. Palmer made a note in a small book she'd produced. We'll see about that. Sheriff McKenna mentioned you're a widow. Yes. Yet you show no signs of mourning. How long has your husband been deceased? Eliza felt Wade tense beside her, but she answered calmly. 8 months. 8 months, Mrs. Palmer's pencil scratched furiously. And already you're cavorting with another man. Working for, Wade corrected sharply. She works for me. So you say? Mrs. Palmer's smile was thin as paper. Well, we shall see what we shall see. What followed were the longest days of Eliza's life. Mrs. Palmer watched everything with her sharp magpie eyes, making notes, asking pointed questions. She criticized Eliza's appearance, her work, her very existence. She insisted on proper arrangements. Eliza was not to enter the main house except under supervision, not to speak with Wade except about business, not to work past sunset. This is harassment, Wade said on the third night, voice low as they tended the horses under Mrs. Palmer's watchful gaze. It's the law, Eliza replied, not trusting herself to say more. The worst came when Mrs. Palmer began interviewing townspeople. She returned one afternoon with a triumphant gleam in her eye. I've had the most interesting conversation with a Mrs. Garrett, she announced over dinner. She tells me you were quite rude to her in the mercantile, defensive, hostile, even— I defended myself against gossip. Eliza said, a proper woman wouldn't need defending. A proper woman's reputation speaks for itself. Mrs. Palmer leaned forward. I've also been in contact with people from Pennsylvania, from your late husband's congregation. Eliza's blood went cold. Have you? Indeed, they paint quite a different picture than the one you've presented. A difficult wife. They say, willful, disobedient. Some even suggest you hastened your poor husband's death with your behavior. That's a lie, Wade said dangerously. Is it, Mrs.? Palmer turned her sharp gaze on him. How well do you really know this woman, Mr. Callahan? Did you know she abandoned her husband's grave without proper mourning, that she left town in the dead of night like a thief, that there were whispers about her mental state? Enough. Eliza stood abruptly. You want the truth? Yes, I was a difficult wife, because my husband demanded obedience in all things, silence in all things, submission in all things, because questioning him, having opinions, wanting to breathe all of that made me difficult. Her voice rose. And yes, I left without mourning him properly, because mourning requires grief, and all I felt was relief. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Palmer's pencil moved frantically across paper. Wade stood as well, moving to Eliza's side. I think you should leave, he told Mrs. Palmer. Now. I'll leave when my investigation is complete, she replied primly. Though I believe I've heard quite enough. A woman who feels no grief for her husband's death, who admits to being willfully disobedient, such a woman is clearly morally compromised. That night, unable to sleep, Eliza walked out to the paddock where the sorrel mare stood dozing in moonlight. She'd thought herself past caring what narrow-minded people thought. But Mrs. Palmer's words had found their mark. Maybe she was morally compromised. Maybe she was everything they said: unnatural, improper, ruined. "Don't believe her poison." Wade's voice came from behind her. He joined her at the fence. Careful not to touch Mrs. Palmer had eyes everywhere. Not a word of it. "What if she's right? What if I am?" "You're the strongest, bravest, most decent person I know," Wade interrupted. "You survived what would have broken most people. You chose freedom over safety, work over pity, truth over comfortable lies. If that makes you improper by their standards, then their standards are worthless." "They'll use this to destroy you," Eliza said quietly. "Your reputation, your business. No one will buy horses from a man who harbors fallen women." "Then I'll raise horses for the joy of it." He finally touched her then, just his pinky finger hooking hers where their hands rested on the fence. "Eliza, I need you to hear this. Really hear it. I don't care what they say. Don't care what it costs. You're worth any price." "I won't let you lose everything for me." "Too late. Already lost everything that matters if you leave." He turned to face her fully, moonlight silvering his features. "I love you. Been trying to keep it professional and proper, but it's like trying not to breathe. So if you're going to run toward something, not away. Run toward me." Before she could respond, a sharp voice cut through the darkness. "I knew it!" Mrs. Palmer emerged from behind the barn, nightrobe billowing, triumph written across her face. "Clandestine meetings, declarations of improper affection. This is exactly what Mr. Dalton suspected." "We've done nothing wrong," Wade said. "Haven't you, an unmarried man, an improperly mourning widow, alone in the darkness?" She practically glowed with vindication. "I'll be making my report to Judge Harris first thing tomorrow. I suspect Mr. Dalton will be most interested in the findings." She swept back toward the house, leaving them standing in moonlight and ruin. Eliza felt something break inside her, not her spirit this time, but her last walls of protection. "I won't let them destroy you," she said fiercely. "Not for me, never for me. And I won't let them drive you away." Wade caught her hands, held tight. "We'll find another way. But what they'd do would have to wait, because in that moment, all they could do was hold on to each other and watch the storm clouds gather on tomorrow's horizon. Dawn came like a reluctant witness, gray and hesitant. Eliza stood in the tack room, her few possessions already packed in the same carpet bag that had brought her here. Mrs. Palmer's threats had crystallized everything she wouldn't let Wade lose: his ranch, his reputation, his life's work because of her. She was fastening the bag when footsteps sounded outside. Not Wade's familiar tread, but something heavier, more deliberate. The door opened without a knock. The man who entered was tall, thin, wearing a traveling coat despite the warming weather. His face was gaunt, eyes deep-set and burning with the kind of fervor she recognized too well. For a moment, Eliza couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at a ghost made flesh. "Hello, wife," Samuel Moreland said. The word hit like a physical blow. "You're dead," she whispered. "They said you drowned in the flood. The Lord preserved me for a purpose." His voice hadn't changed, still that measured cadence that could shift from silk to steel in a heartbeat. "To retrieve what was stolen from me." "I stole nothing. You stole yourself." He stepped closer, and she smelled the familiar mixture of pomade and righteousness that had once made her stomach turn. "A wife belongs to her husband. You took what was mine and fled like a thief in the night." Eliza forced herself to stand straight, to meet those terrible eyes. "I'm not your wife. Not anymore. Death parted us. Remember, till death do us part, that was the vow. But I'm not dead. His smile was a wound. "Which means our vows stand. You're still mine before God and law." "No?" The word came out stronger than she felt. "I mourned you, buried you in my heart, started a new life." "Playing whore to a horse trader." The violence in his voice made her flinch. "Oh, yes, I know all about your situation here. Mr. Dalton was most informative when he contacted me. Told me exactly where to find my wayward wife and what sins she'd fallen into." The pieces clicked into place. Dalton's revenge. More thorough than she'd imagined. He hadn't just threatened their reputation, he'd resurrected her past in flesh and bone. "Get out." Wade's voice came from the doorway. Deadly quiet. He stood there like judgment itself, hand resting on his holstered pistol. "Off my property. Now." Samuel turned, taking Wade's measure with those calculating eyes. "You must be Callahan, the man who's been harboring my wife, corrupting her." "The only corruption here is you," Wade said. "Now I told you to leave." "I'll leave, with what's mine." Samuel turned back to Eliza. "Pack your things. We have a long journey home." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "No." Samuel produced a folded document. "This says otherwise. Legal marriage certificate. Never dissolved, never annulled. You're my wife in the eyes of law and God. If you refuse to come, I'll have the sheriff enforce my rights. Unless..." He paused, savoring the moment. "You'd prefer I press charges? Adultery carries serious penalties in this territory." Eliza felt the walls closing in, the same suffocating trap that had driven her to run. But this time, Wade stepped forward. "Your paper doesn't mean anything here," he said. "This is my land, my ranch. She works for me, and she's under my protection." "Protection," Samuel laughed, "sharp and ugly. Is that what you call it? I wonder what Judge Harris will think when he hears how you've been protecting another man's wife." "I'll go." Both men turned at Eliza's quiet words. She stood straight, shoulders back, meeting Samuel's triumph with steady eyes. "I'll go with you, but only if you agree to leave Mr. Callahan and his ranch alone. No charges, no complaints, no revenge." "Eliza, no!" Wade started forward, but she held up a hand. "It's the only way," she said, hating how her voice trembled. "I won't let you lose everything because of me." Samuel's smile was a serpent's. "How touching. Very well, I agree. Pack your things." "I need a moment," Eliza said, to say goodbye to the horses." Samuel's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. 5 minutes, then we leave." He stepped outside. Wade immediately caught Eliza's arms. "You can't go with him. You can't." "I have to." Tears burned her eyes but didn't fall. "He's right about the law, and he'll destroy you if I don't." "I don't care." "I care." She pressed her palm to his cheek, memorizing the feel of stubble and warmth. "I care about you too much to watch him tear apart everything you've built. This ranch, these horses, they're your life's work." "You're my life," Wade said desperately. "The rest is just things, wood and land and animals. Without you..." "You'll survive." She forced the words past the knife in her throat. "You're the strongest man I know. You'll survive and thrive and maybe find someone who doesn't come with ghosts and legal documents and..." He kissed her, fierce and desperate, pouring everything they'd never have into that moment. She kissed him back, tasting salt and goodbye. When they broke apart, she was crying. "Take care of the sorrel mare. She likes apples with her evening feed." "Eliza." "I love you," she whispered. "That's why I have to go." She pulled away before he could respond, grabbed her carpet bag, and walked out to where Samuel waited. Her husband, how the word burned, stood by a hired buggy, impatience written in every line of his body. "Finally," he said, "get in." She climbed up, movements mechanical. Wade had followed them out, and she couldn't look at him, couldn't see the devastation on his face. But as Samuel took the reins, Wade spoke. "Moreland." Samuel paused, looking back with irritation. What? I know what you are. Wade's voice was steady as stone. Knew it the minute you walked in. Met plenty like you men who break things because they can't stand to see them whole. But here's what you don't know. He stepped closer. She's stronger than you, always has been. You might take her body back to Pennsylvania, but you'll never have her spirit again. And that'll eat you alive, knowing she beat you just by surviving. Samuel's face darkened. You dare. I dare plenty, and I'll dare more. See, you made one mistake in your bargaining. Wade smiled, cold as winter wind. You said I couldn't press charges, couldn't seek revenge, but you didn't say anything about her friends, and she's got them now, people who know her worth. We'll be watching, and if you hurt her, if you so much as bruise her spirit, we'll know, and law or no law, husband or not, we'll come for her. Threats, Mr. Callahan. Promises. Wade looked past him to Eliza. You're not alone. Never again. Remember that. Samuel snapped the reins, and the buggy lurched forward. Eliza allowed herself one look back at Wade standing in the yard like a man carved from grief, at the barn where she'd found herself, at the sorrel mare who'd come to the paddock fence to watch her leave. Then she faced forward, into a future that looked like her past, and tried to find the strength Wade claimed she had. The journey stretched endless. Samuel was silent at first, but as they left Dry Willow behind, he began to speak about her sins, her waywardness, the correction that awaited, about the prayers and penance that would cleanse her rebellious spirit. Each word was familiar, a litany she'd heard throughout their marriage, but now they fell on different ears. Ears that had heard Wade's quiet praise, the townspeople's gratitude, the soft nickering of horses who trusted her touch. You're not listening, Samuel said sharply. I'm listening, she replied. I'm just not believing anymore. He backhanded her. Not hard enough to leave a mark, Samuel never left marks where others might see, but sharp enough to split her lip. The copper taste of blood was familiar too. You'll learn respect again, he said, however long it takes. Eliza touched her lip, looked at the blood on her fingers. Once, that sight would have made her cower. Now she felt something else, a cold, clear anger that burned steady as starlight. No, she said quietly, I won't. Samuel pulled the buggy to a stop. They were miles from anywhere. Empty prairie stretching in all directions. What did you say? I said no. She met his eyes directly. You can take me back. You can lock me up. You can preach at me until your voice gives out. But you can't make me be what I was. That woman is dead. You buried her yourself with every cruel word, every small cruelty. What's left is someone else. Someone you don't know and can't control. His face contorted with rage. But before he could strike again, she laughed, actually laughed, sharp and bitter. Go ahead, she said. Hit me, hurt me. Show me again exactly what you are. But know this, every bruise proves Wade right. You are weak, so weak you need violence to feel strong. So weak you had to hunt down a woman who'd rather sleep in a barn than in your bed. You're hysteric, Samuel said coldly. Clearly your time among heathens has damaged your mind, but we have treatments for that. Doctors who specialize in female disorders. Try it. She leaned forward. Lock me in an asylum. Drug me. Do whatever you think will break me. But I'll still be free in the only way that matters. Because I chose something else. I chose work and worth and love, real love. Not your twisted ownership. And you can't take that away, no matter what papers you wave. For a moment, she thought he would kill her there on the empty prairie. His hands shook with rage, his face mottled purple. But Samuel Moreland was many things cruel, controlling, righteous in his own twisted way, but he wasn't impulsive. Murder would be messy, hard to explain. Instead, he smiled, that terrible, patient smile she remembered from their worst nights. We'll see, he said simply, and took up the reins again. We'll see how long your defiance lasts. But as the buggy rolled on toward a future that looked like prison, Eliza held Wade's words close as armor. She wasn't alone. She had friends now, people who'd seen her worth. And she had something else, the knowledge that she'd chosen love over safety, truth over comfortable lies. It would have to be enough. It would have to sustain her through whatever came next. Because Wade was right about one thing, she was stronger than Samuel knew. She'd proved it by surviving him once. Now she just had to do it again. The stagecoach stop appeared like salvation in the desert, a rough building with fresh horses and the promise of rest. Samuel had driven through the night, pushing hard despite Eliza's silence. Now, with dawn breaking rose and gold across the prairie, he was forced to stop. "We'll rest the horses," he announced, as if she cared. 2 hours. Don't attempt anything foolish." But as they entered the way station, Eliza's heart leaped. There, tending horses in the corral, was Henrik the blacksmith. He looked up, recognized her, and his expression shifted from surprise to understanding in an instant. Samuel didn't notice, too focused on arranging food and asserting his authority to the station master. Eliza moved toward the window, ostensibly stretching travel-cramped muscles, and caught Henrik's eye. She touched her split lip, glanced meaningfully at Samuel, then at the road leading back to Dry Willow. Henrik nodded once and disappeared into the stable. An hour later, as Samuel dozed in a chair confident in his victory, the door burst open. Wade stood there, dusty and travel-worn, with Sheriff McKenna and Doc Morrison flanking him. Samuel jerked awake, face darkening. "What's the meaning of this?" "Funny thing about telegraph lines," Sheriff McKenna said conversationally. "They run both ways. Got an interesting message from Pennsylvania this morning. Seems there was an inquiry about one Samuel Moreland, presumed drowned in last spring's floods." "Obviously mistaken," Samuel said coldly. "I'm very much alive." "That's the problem." Doc Morrison stepped forward. "See, when a man's declared dead, certain legal things happen. His property gets distributed. His debts get called in. His marriage," he paused meaningfully, "gets dissolved." Eliza's breath caught. Samuel stood slowly, menace in every line. "That's impossible." "Got the papers right here." McKenna produced a telegram. "From the county clerk in Millwood, Pennsylvania, Samuel Moreland, declared legally deceased 8 months ago. Estate settled. Wife released from all bonds of matrimony." "I wasn't dead." "But you were gone." Wade spoke for the first time. "For 8 months. You let her believe you were dead. Let the whole town believe it. That's abandonment in any court, and a dead man can't have a living wife." Samuel's control finally snapped. He lunged for Eliza, but Wade was already moving. This time, it wasn't a punch, but a careful restraint, pinning Samuel's arms while the man struggled and cursed. "Here's what's going to happen," Sheriff McKenna said calmly. "You're going to get back on whatever conveyance brought you here and return to Pennsylvania. You're going to stay there, because if you come back, if you so much as send a letter, I'll arrest you for assault, attempted kidnapping, and fraud." "Fraud." "Claiming to be a dead man's pretty fraudulent in my book." McKenna smiled thinly. "Not to mention trying to enforce rights you don't have anymore." "This is conspiracy." Samuel spat. "You're all in on it. That telegraph is fake. Those papers." "Feel free to verify them," Doc Morrison suggested. "Course, that means going back to Pennsylvania and explaining to folks there how you're alive but didn't bother telling anyone for 8 months. Imagine there's some interesting questions waiting about where you've been. Maybe some debts to settle." For the first time, uncertainty flickered in Samuel's eyes. Whatever had kept him away, gambling debts, other women, shady dealings he clearly didn't want scrutinized. Wade released him, stepped back. "You're done here. Moreland, done with her, done with us. Take the offer and go, or stay and face consequences. Your choice." Samuel looked at each of them, then at Eliza. "This isn't over." You're still my wife before God." "Your God," Eliza said quietly, speaking for the first time. "Not mine. My God doesn't use fear as love or bruises as blessings. My God lives in sunset through barn slats and horses running free and hands that hold without hurting." She stepped forward, no longer afraid. "You want to know what you are before God? Samuel, you're a lesson. You taught me what love isn't, so I could recognize what it is. You taught me that surviving isn't living, so I could choose life. You taught me that being alone with yourself is better than being together with someone who makes you small." She removed her wedding ring, thin gold worn smooth, and set it on the table. "Take this back. Sell it. You always valued money more than meaning anyway. But know that I'm not running anymore. Not from you. Not from anyone. I'm choosing where to stand, and it's not with you." Samuel's face was stone, but his hands shook. Pride warred with pragmatism, rage with calculation. Finally, he picked up the ring. "You'll regret this," he said. "When you're old and alone, when no decent man will have you." "I'll have her." Wade's words fell simple as rain. He moved to stand beside Eliza, not touching but close enough she felt his warmth. "If she'll have me, today, tomorrow, 50 years from now, decent or not, I'll have her and be grateful for the privilege. Actually," Doc Morrison added cheerfully, "I'm authorized to perform marriages. Got ordained years back for frontier emergencies. Could do it right here if you're of a mind." Eliza turned to Wade, saw the question in his eyes. Not pressure, just possibility. She thought of the mare in winter, fighting to breathe, of floodwaters and held ropes, of quiet mornings in the barn, and his hand teaching hers to gentle wild things. "Not here," she said softly. "Not with him watching. But yes, when we're home, when the sorrel mare can be witness and the morning light comes through the barn slats just right. Yes." Wade's smile could have lit the prairie. He offered her his arm, formal, proper, but his eyes held promises of things decidedly improper. "Then let's go home." They left Samuel standing there with his worthless ring and worthless rage. As the wagon rolled away, Henrik driving, the others riding escort, Eliza didn't look back. There was nothing there to see. Instead, she looked forward, toward Dry Willow, toward the ranch, toward a life built on trust instead of fear. Wade sat beside her, their hands linked between them, and for the first time in her life, silence between a man and woman felt like peace instead of storm warning. "I need to tell you something," she said as familiar landmarks appeared. "About being married. I'm not whole. There are parts of me that might never work right, fears that might never fully fade." "Eliza," he squeezed her hand, "I'm not asking for perfect. I'm asking for real, for partnership, for the chance to wake up every morning knowing you're there by choice, not obligation. I might have nightmares. Then I'll hold you till they pass. I might flinch sometimes when you move too fast. Then I'll learn to move slower. You might be human," he interrupted gently, "scarred and scared and stronger than steel despite it all. I'm not looking to fix you, Eliza, just looking to love you. If you'll let me." The ranch appeared as the sun reached its zenith. The horses whickered greeting, and the sorrel mare trotted to the fence, tail high with excitement. Everything looked exactly as they'd left it, but somehow entirely different. Home, Eliza thought. The word that had meant prison now meant possibility. Doc Morrison stayed for dinner, as did Sheriff McKenna and Henrik. They ate Wade's terrible cooking and laughed at his attempts at biscuits. They talked about horses and weather and carefully didn't mention the morning's drama. As they prepared to leave, McKenna pulled Eliza aside. "That telegram was real. By the way, Samuel Moreland is legally dead in Pennsylvania. Has been for months. Makes you a free woman in the eyes of the law." "How?" "Henrik remembered you mentioning Millwood. I sent an inquiry last week. Soon as Wade told me about Dalton's threats. Figured it might be useful to know your exact legal standing." He tipped his hat. "Welcome to Dry Willow, Miss Eliza." Officially this time. After they left, Eliza found Wade in the barn, checking on the horses as always. The lantern light caught the silver threads in his dark hair, highlighted hands gentle on the sorrel mare's neck. "Second thoughts?" he asked without turning. "No." She joined him at the stall. "Just thinking about circles. How I ran from one life and ended up building another. How I left a man who quoted scripture but dealt in cruelty, and found one who speaks kindness to horses and means it." "That's not a circle," Wade said. "That's a journey, and you're not at the end yet." "No," she smiled. "Where am I then?" He turned to her then, cupped her face with those careful horseman's hands. "At the beginning, the real beginning, where you get to choose not from fear or necessity, but from want, from love." "Then I choose you," she said simply. "I choose this ranch and these horses and dawn feedings and your terrible coffee. I choose all of it." He kissed her then, there in the barn with horses as witness and hay dust dancing in lantern light. It tasted like promise and home and all the mornings yet to come. When they broke apart, the sorrel mare nickered softly, and Eliza laughed free and unfettered as she hadn't since childhood. "I think she approves," Wade murmured against her hair. "Good," Eliza said. "Because I want her there when Doc Morrison makes it official. Her and the yearling and that ornery stallion. The whole family." "Family," Wade repeated, wonder in his voice. "Yes, that's what we are, isn't it?" Standing there in the barn she'd once seen as refuge and now knew as home, Eliza felt the last of her old life fall away like shed skin. She was no longer running, no longer hiding. She was exactly where she belonged, with someone who knew that love wasn't ownership and trust wasn't weakness. Someone who understood that the strongest bonds were the ones chosen freely, held lightly, and renewed each day like morning feeding necessary and sustaining and sacred in their simple constancy. Tomorrow, Doc Morrison would speak words over them. But tonight, in the quiet barn with gentle horses and patient love, they were already married in all the ways that mattered. Eliza Moreland was dead, had been dead long before Samuel disappeared. But Eliza, just Eliza, was finally, fully, freely alive. And that was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Eliza and Wade's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts on their story. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience, trust, and love blooming in the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 for more authentic stories from this remarkable era. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more people discover these powerful stories of the Old West. Until next time, partners.